Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
An age from their mid-20s to about 60, men and women, heterosexual, gay, lesbian, and people worked in many different settings. A couple of people worked at Zen Hospice. Terry worked in jails and prisons, and he's going to talk more about that. Some people worked in soup kitchens. Someone worked in a West Berkeley computer organization that refurbished used computers and brought them to families in West Berkeley that had very little access to, low-income families, and then trained young people and their parents how to use these computers. Quite a range of service opportunities. And as a group, we studied the precepts. We sat every time we met, and then we talked about some of the experiences that came up as people entered their placements, and some of them for the first time doing the kind of volunteer work they were doing. Now we have a wider community of BASE graduates. There are about 100 people who've been through BASE, many of them in the Bay Area. So once a month we have BASE community retreats, and we've had 3 so far. And we started a newsletter called Touching BASE. We had one issue came out this past year. As part of my BASE experience last year, I joined May Lee Scott in teaching stress management at the San Francisco County Jail. I did that for 6 months, working with a group of women prisoners, and that was teaching yoga, meditation, and then leading a discussion. And it was a profound experience for me to have that direct encounter with the women week after week, hear something about what their lives were like. My background before that has been in social work, and in the last 7 or 8 years since I moved to the Bay Area, I've mostly done social change work with my partner, Fran Peavy, some of that in the former Yugoslavia, and some of that in India, cleaning the Ganges River. So it was also good for me to do a project that was face-to-face and in my own community. I think I'll end my part, because we all want to leave plenty of time for questions, with a short quote from Shanti Deva that was written in the 8th century, and it's part of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. These lines, I find them inspiring, and they're actually part of an article that Alan Senaki, who's the director of Buddhist Peace Fellowship, wrote in Inquiring Mind a couple of issues back, an article where he was urging more of the Buddhist teachers to talk about engaged Buddhism and encourage Buddhist practitioners to move from the cushion more into the world. For all those ailing in the world, until their every sickness has been healed, may I myself become for them the doctor, the nurse, the medicine itself. May I be a guard for those who are protectorless, a guide for those who journey on the road. For those who wish to go across the water, may I be a boat, a raft, a bridge. Thank you. And now Terry will speak, and I'll ring the bell just so we have a couple of minutes to breathe and let in what I've said, and welcome Terry.
As I was thinking about what I was going to say today, I was thinking what an appropriate time this is, this week, to be talking about social engagement as the craziness in Washington proceeds and in the war in Iraq. I thought what I would do is tell you a little bit about myself and segue then into talking about my experience in base, and then give you a little bit of information about the work I've been doing in prisons. All that in 10 minutes. I've begun sitting with this Sangha for the past 2 months or so, and have met a few of you, and have been cooking for the homeless with Clint during the past 2 months. So I hope to become more involved in a gay Buddhist fellowship. My own background is that I was at a Midwestern Michigan State University on the faculty there, psychiatry professor for 23 years. And my partner and I decided on the coast of Oregon about 9 years ago that we were going to change our lifestyles and move. We didn't know where we were going to move to. But we decided over a period of time that we were going to come to San Francisco, the Bay Area. And my purpose in wanting to leave Michigan and leave the position I had was that I wanted to deepen my spiritual practice, and I wanted to become more socially involved and more of an activist. I didn't really know what form that was going to take when we did this negotiation, and I was able to get an early retirement from the university, which provided some cushion for making this move and relocation. In June of 1996, we left Michigan and took a 6-month trip around the country while I was doing some writing. But we arrived here in November of 1996, and had a series of personal issues both of us had to deal with. But I tried to get started in both the spiritual path and the activist path as quickly as possible, but it was delayed somewhat. I've been sitting and meditating for about 25 years, but I really hadn't been involved with a Sangha or community consistently, though I'd had several teachers prior to coming to the Bay Area. And I really think that sitting, and for me, a lot of people I know struggle with finding the time or consistency in their meditation, but for some reason it fit with me. And I've really done it twice a day for 25 years without too many missings. And I really think that in terms of the path that I've chosen to follow right now, that it provided a seed that has grown into the current work that I'm doing in my life. So when I arrived here, I began looking into, having spent most of my life in an academic setting, I began looking into academic programs. What else does one do when that's all you know? I took some courses at the University of Creation Spirituality with Matthew Fox, and I found, and I talked to people at some other institutions, and I found this to be interesting, but not really speaking to me in my heart. I've been a member of BPF for several years and subscribed to Turning Wheel, so I knew about the BASE program. And so I finally decided that I needed something more experientially based than academically based. And it coincided with Tova's beginning to be the coordinator of BASE. And I went to talk to her and was still somewhat hesitant, but decided I had been doing a lot of sittings at Spirit Rock and retreats and other things, but was somewhat hesitant. But last fall decided to go ahead and apply for the program and entered the base program that Tova mentioned in February of this year. I really think it was a wonderful experience. The diversity of the people in terms of their backgrounds and what they brought to the group was really provided a rich experience for all of us, I think. And the intensity, because we met for about 5 hours a week together, and then we engaged in our various service commitments. So it really was, for some of us, almost a full-time commitment. Though there was a range of amount of time people spent on that. The outcome for me was that it really also deepened my involvement with Buddhist practice. And I began sitting daily at the Berkeley Zen Center in the mornings. And it took me a while to adjust to the time, because I have to get up at 5 o'clock. And that seemed very early and very disruptive when I first started doing it. But now I'm used to it, and I really like it. It feels like a nice container for the beginning of my day. While I was in base, I began working in the prisons. I worked as at one of the San Francisco jails, the new jail on number 8, I think it is. And I've also worked at the FCI Dublin, the women's prison. And I also began, while I was in base, to cook for the homeless over in the Dorothy Day House in Berkeley. The work I've done in the prisons has been just wonderful. When I was first trying to decide what I wanted to do for my commitment to service commitment with base, I was really not that certain. I knew that when I thought about doing more social activist work, I needed to move out of the type of work I had been doing. I've been an activist since at least college, but most of the work I have done has been in a professional setting. I've written and edited several volumes on mental health issues for gay men and lesbians, and worked within the psychiatric profession in terms of major changes in the gay and lesbian psychiatrist group, which now has about 1,000 members. It's a very large organization. And have worked back in Michigan with AIDS groups and so forth, but it was almost all of that was within a professional context, and I felt like I wanted to work with people who were less privileged. As a psychotherapist, most of my work, which was very satisfying to me, was also with people who were privileged and educated, so I needed to make some other type of contact at this point in my life. So I talked with Tova, and she and I processed this a bit in terms of my wish to work at hospice, my wish to work with cancer groups, and working in the prisons. And she suggested that maybe working in the prisons would give me more of that difference from what I had been doing. So I started these groups, one in February and the other two in March. And what they are is they're a variation on what Tova mentioned, which is I do a meditation group. I do longer groups. I do about 2 hours in the groups, and meditation, and then journal writing and processing. And the one in the jail was with a group of men in a recovery program. And also because the men and the women who are in this group are self-selected, they're really very committed and dedicated to what they're doing. So they've taught me a lot. I've gone out there many days when I've maybe not felt so good, and they lift me up. So I feel like they've really done as much service to me as I to them. I stopped the men's group in the city in November because I'm going to be coordinating a new prison-based program, and that's taking considerable time. But I'm continuing to do 2 women's groups at the prison. I thought, well, let me give you, I'd like to tell you a few incidents that happened in the prisons to give you some sense of the type of experiences that the people have shared with me. The most recent one is Maylie Scott, whom Tova mentioned previously. And I do about every month or every other month all-day sittings at the prison with the women. And this past week we did one, and I was there for the whole day in the prison, and Maylie went over to the camp. And part of it is a silent meal that we take together. And we had gone through, again, an orientation, Maylie and I, about a month and a half ago, and they talked about how we can't bring anything into the prison. because anything we bring in is considered contraband, and we can't give anything to the women. Well, I write. I have a writing part of what I do, and so I give them journals, and we're still trying to deal with that. But the meal, the women take food from the cafeteria and from the commissary, and they bring it together and share for lunch. And I felt like I usually take some hummus and carrots along with me for eating after I'm there. And so I bring it in during these retreats that we do. And I've done it. This is the third one, and I've done it regularly. So Meili had left, and we were sitting, beginning to prepare for our lunch in silence. And suddenly the door bursts open, and the secretary comes in and says, "Take that food away." And we all turned around, and I didn't know exactly what to do, but I got my hummus and carrots, put it in the cooler. The women kept going with their food. And the woman called me out and said, "You can't do this. You've broken the rules. We have to call the guards." Well, I was getting a little scared at this point, not knowing what the consequences of this was going to be. And I said, "Tina," I've met this woman, "it's just a little hummus. I didn't bring all this food, and some carrots, and I've removed it from the table." And she wouldn't stop. She said, "We're calling the guards, and they have to come and do their thing." So I go back in and tell the women what has happened, and they continue to lay out their food. And the guard comes in, and he comes over and says, "Stand back from the food." And the women said, "No, this is our food." And I said, "The only food that's contraband is the little container of hummus and carrots, and I've removed it." And the guard said, "That's all? You didn't bring all the rest of this?" And I said, "No, I've been trying to tell somebody." And he said, "I'm sorry, there's been a terrible mistake." And he walked out, and these other people walked with him. I was really shaken up by this because of the demeanor of the people who were engaging us until the guard sort of acted in a certain manner. So we returned to silence. I read some things from Thich Nhat Hanh about eating in silence. But this was very much with me, and the feeling of being totally really not existing in this woman's eyes as she was following the rules. And as we broke silence later in the afternoon, we talked about the incident. And I said that I found it painful, but I was thankful because I think I knew better how these women feel all the time in the prisons, which is exactly what they shared, that this is how they're treated, and this is how they talk about a lot. So ultimately, even though I'm not going to take any more hummus back in, I thought this hummus incident was really quite helpful for me in having more compassion than I already had for being with them. I think I'm taking too much time, but I'm still quickly going to tell another incident because it was very, very powerful for me. The journal writing I had read. This is early in the time I did these groups, and I read from Jarvis Master's book, Finding Freedom, and he is on death row at San Quentin and is a practicing Buddhist. And he writes a really eloquent little piece chapter about his first day in prison in San Quentin, and how he had to find find his home in his heart. And so one of the journal writing exercises that I asked the women and the men to do was to write about their first day in prison. And this was the incident I'm going to tell you was among a group of men. There were about 12 men in the group at that point. And there was this one man who was African American and seemed sort of surly, and I didn't know exactly how he would be in the group. And after they did the writing about the first day in the prison, he asked to read his, which is what we do. We share the writings if people wish to. And he had been in prison. He was 35 years old, and he had been in prison, I think, 17 or 18 years of his life. He chose to write about the first day in prison as opposed to the first day in jail or in a youth center. He talked about being terrified because when he went to prison, he was very young. And he went inside the prison, and he was just absolutely terrified. And so he was talking to a man. They were walking together. And this group of men were approaching them, and they looked very threatening. And the man described very poignantly how he just kept talking because he couldn't imagine what to do if these people confronted him. And he kept talking, and they walked through these men, and he kept talking, and when they got through, he realized that the other man was no longer next to him. That he had been stabbed. And when he read this, the entire group of men was just speechless, and it was very powerful. And again, it had a lot of emotional impact, but I also learned about my own sense of alienation from people based upon their language or a variety of things. Over and over again, the people in the prison, I had several other stories I was going to tell you, but there's not time to do that. But over and over again, they teach me what I already knew, that they're not the other, which is how the prisons orient us to work with, but they're really people who are in a lot of pain and suffering. I'll stop there, though I have lots more I could say, but I think my time is more than up.
I feel like such a wimp because I've torn cartilage in both my knees and I just can't do the cool lotus position, and I'm very self-conscious about sitting up here. I want to say why I joined the Buddhist Alliance for Social Engagement and what my experiences were when I was in it. Actually, my last meeting with that group that I've been in for a year and a half is first week in January, because I'm going to join another group when the time conflicts. And sort of, I've had some thoughts this week knowing that I was going to speak here about how the Buddhist Alliance for Social Engagement had affected me in ways that I wasn't aware of until I thought something about it. But in 1994, about 4.5 years ago, I took disability because of a low T cell count that gave me an AIDS diagnosis, and I was experiencing a lot of fatigue. I also was in a terribly burnt out job. I was a video producer director at UC Berkeley for about 20 years, and the budget was being cut, and I had had the same boss, and it was very dysfunctional. I'm sure you all have been there. And they were trying to move me into a position that I was internally unsuited for. And it was very, very stressful. And of course, there aren't too many want ads in the paper for educational television directors, and I felt kind of trapped, even though I had made some attempts to get out of there. So anyway, I took disability, and I thought, okay, I'll just, if I really retired, what would my mindset be? Oh, I'd take a few trips, do some nice things, and die, because in 1994 there were a few exceptions to that progression, but not too many. So then 2.5 years ago, in the summer of 96, I realized that because of the new medicines that might not happen to me, and that kind of frustrated me a great deal. I had to completely change my mindset, and some people think, oh, wasn't it a relief? And it was, well, no, not really, because I had the 10-year plan all set, and now I had to come up with another one, and I didn't want to go back to that career. So a big thing was kind of fears coming up about a career. And I had heard about this profession called drama therapy, and most of my professional training has been in theater, and I've also done a lot of counseling adjunct to that, and so it seemed to me that drama therapy was a cool thing for me to investigate. And so I did, and it was relatively easy for me to do, and I liked it a lot. There were certain things about working in video and in theater that I still miss a great deal, and that are actually an inhibition to going forward full blast with the other career. training. But I'm still very fearful about it because there are a lot of complications. As you know, if you're on disability, if you go back to work, the private disability completely disappears, and I have no cushion if the new job doesn't work, and it's something you have to be your own self-promoter. I can't plug into a university anymore, or I don't want to, and so there are a lot of fears coming up. So I sit with James Baraz's Vipassana group on Thursday nights in Berkeley, and he always has guest speakers come in, and I believe it was Tova and Donald Rothberg, is that his name? And Jorge, I can't remember who else came in, but about last August of '97, they came in and did a presentation on BASE, which was an organization where you brought your spiritual practice towards your job or your career. And I thought, wow, this would be a great support group for me into staying with this. By then, I was about to embark on an internship with this drama therapy business, and I didn't quite know what was going to happen, and I wanted support for that. So that's why I got into it. There were most of the people in the group were in social work type of positions. Donald Rothberg, who was the leader, is a professor at Saybrook College, and he's really trying to soften up the academic environment, which probably needs softening at most institutions, as well as bringing his own agenda into some of the curriculum. And it's open to that. I guess Jack Cornfield and some other Vipassana teachers have gone through Saybrook, so it's not completely alien to his philosophy. But it's a lot of stress if you've ever observed or been in an academic administrative position. And he actually was working on that. There was a woman who was actually a writer for the Bay Guardian, and she found that she was writing about things that she wanted to do. She wanted to be an activist, and she was writing about it. And right after she got promoted to being an editor, she quit because in this group she found that her real calling was not that. So there were some really surprise turns in the base group in terms of how people related to their job. There's one woman in our group who has a corporate job sort of in human relations. And recently she said, I feel so out of it because I'm not working in frontline poverty areas or, hardcore burning issues areas. But we gave her a lot of support for right livelihood in trying to be present for her job, and she really was doing a great job in what she was doing. So we had a very broad range of reasons of why people were in there and how I could actually see it affect them. What it also did for me that I didn't realize was that I approached Buddhism much like Catholicism. I would go to a meeting once or twice a week and get a spiritual infusion, and then when I felt I needed another spiritual infusion, I'd go back, the next week. And the idea of practicing it every moment or every day, or even being mindful a couple of times a day, was starting to dawn on me. But I really like the idea of having something very specific, that is my job plans, of bringing the practice to that. And it was a big change for me, and so that I wouldn't leave my practice at GBF or my sittings on Thursday night in Berkeley. And I think I had a tendency to do that. Every once in a while, the real practice would come to me. Donald encouraged us to form our own base groups. And somewhere along the line, I thought it'd be really nice to be in a group that was examining sexuality and practice. And David, who's the heavyset David, who's here a lot, and he reads the Dedication of Merit. What's his name? Holmes. He kept reading the Dedication of Merit, and I was thinking about it in terms of my own sexuality and my sexual practices. I would never think to bring the practice to that. I think I had this very deep-rooted puritanical thought that sex was a necessary evil still, and that, it didn't quite jive too much with sexual practice. I mean, that might have been at the base of it, but I never really. But then I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to bring my spirituality to my sexuality as much as I've attempted to bring it to thoughts about my job. So in this Sangha, we've formed a spirituality and sexuality group. I want to read the dedication of merit because I kept inserting sexual practice whenever the word practice came up, and it made for a very interesting reading for me. By the power and the truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that live. And I really thought that my sexual practice was not so that all beings would have happiness and the causes of happiness. It was very ego-centered. So I'm very glad we formed this group. Most of the people in the group are late 40s, early 50s, sort of in the Stonewall generation, and most of them are actually here. And I suggested forming a base-type group, but it was too intimidating, really, for a lot of people. They just wanted to get together and talk about it. So really that's what we do. And we try to announce topics that are specific, that it's a co-facilitated group. We've talked about attachment, we've talked about S&M, we've talked about aging. We've done about 12 topics, and I couldn't remember all of them last week, and I still can't remember all of them. But we do attempt to bring the Dharma formally into our discussion. I mean, it was my desire to bring the practice formally into a discussion group so that it would be a little bit different than a rap group that you may be able to find in other community organizations. So it's been very good, and it's really woken me up to my history as a gay man in a very touching, a way that kind of chokes me up now in a profound way. It really made me realize where I was coming from, and that there was a whole generation of people really coming from it. It became very real, more than reading about it or just marching in the gay pride parade, to see everybody being so real, and for me to be able to be present and listen to them. And yes, that's why I am who I am today. And it's very thrilling. It was very thrilling. There's 5 of us, and we may stay together as a group for another 12 weeks. We're going to discuss this tomorrow. But if anyone wants to start a practice group and talk about sexuality, or someone here a couple of weeks ago talked about forming a group around depression in practice, and I'm someone who's had several depressions, and that topic really interested me a lot. Depression as practice, or really get in a Buddhist group that talks about HIV as practice. I mean, I hate it when people say, well, isn't it a gift because you have a sexual transformation? And, my first impulse is to punch them out and say, I'd rather not have HIV and have my sexual transformation. Thank you very much. But it would be kind of cool to have a group that really brought the Dharma to the practice of dealing with HIV, whether one had the virus or just dealing with it in the community. And the last thing I'll say, because I know that the 30 minutes is up that we were going to give ourselves, is that I had an experience where I was a pre-test and post-test counselor at the Berkeley HIV clinic, and I worked in it for 3 years, and someone once said to me after 3 years, gee, I think that's so great what you're doing. I really think that's very moving and touching. And I had never given myself credit for that, or no one had ever said that before, because I think those of us that are in the middle of this epidemic, either as a helper or managing our own health, just take so much for granted. I mean, it's such a busy situation. I was really moved to tears because I had never thought of it that I was doing a cool thing or a good thing. It was almost a necessary thing. I was sort of in a panic mode one year. What am I going to do about this epidemic? Well, go do something. So I went and trained for HIV pre-test and post-test counselor. And I would just ask people here, because it's happened a couple of times since then, that to really, at some time, there isn't time now, but maybe sometime today, to think about how you've socially engaged in the world vis-a-vis the HIV epidemic, whether it's helping somebody, whether it's contributing for money, whether it's showing up at the demonstrations, whether it's helping with the many charitable events that go on. Your social engagement, a lot of us have been in recovery groups. I think being in the various positions in recovery groups is a very important way of social engagement, and I don't think we give ourselves credit for it. I know for a long time I felt very guilty, I'm not really doing anything, but on examination of a lot of the things I was into, I was satisfactorily socially engaged. And I'm very happy that I'm noticing that now. For some reason, it takes a big burden, and it makes me feel in a place of grace that I didn't realize. And I really would ask people, especially people burnt out on the epidemic, because I think when you're burnt out on it, you don't give yourself credit, you stop feeling and stop doing. The World's AIDS vigil in Oakland was attended by only 75 people this year. So people are getting burnt out, or people think that the epidemic is over. And if you want to hear from a long-term survivor how it isn't over with my own condition, you can talk with me afterwards. But it isn't over, and certainly internationally, the horror is really just beginning to dawn on most Americans. So anyway, my last statement would be a pitch to give yourself credit for being able to hold whatever you've been able to hold in the epidemic, and whatever other service that you've sort of intuitively or without thinking have given the gay community or the San Francisco Bay Area community.
Now we have time for a few responses. I want to give one too.
Okay, great. Yeah, responses.
Well, I actually want to give testimony. I belong to a prison scion in New York, a scion that was in a prison, in the Max prison. That was a very profound experience for me to sit every week with men who, on a regular basis, I didn't go every week. The Zen Center has a prison project. The Zen Center here in San Francisco, and it now currently has 9 teams that are going out to prisons and doing the stress management. And I'm doing one of them now. I did it just once, but I will be doing that in January, one. And also another part of the project, which would be very relatively easy for people to participate in, is corresponding with prisoners. David, you're still collecting letters? You have a backlog?
No.
Oh, great. Well,
yeah, but I'm corresponding now with 6 prisoners, and a very wide variety of people. Very different, very, very different. It's a very interesting experience. I'm retired, so I can do 6. But just doing 1 or 2 is a very interesting experience. It seems to me, I know that it means, because I remember sitting in the prison, just being there with them was just very significant. And also, so it just seemed to get a letter from me, it seemed to be very significant to them. It's hard for me to give myself the credit. What does it mean so much to you? Like that. So there's a big backlog of letters at the Zen Center. There's a staff member there, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it later on. And it's a very interesting experience to write to somebody. Okay, thanks.
Just want to add, Terry, you didn't talk about BAP-BASE, which is coming up. It's a Bay Area prison-based program, and there's someone in that group, Judith McCullough, who's coordinating prison correspondence, and she's connecting with the folks at Zen Center and Berkeley Zen Center and the community of mindful living, because many places do have a backlog. Prisoners send letters, and so to Buddhist practice places, and we're trying to respond in a more timely
In November, I was writing to people who asked for, they really asked for correspondence in June, and the letters are very heartfelt. So
it's a wonderful thing to do. Are there other questions or comments? Charlie?
Many of you haven't seen me here for a long time. I've kind of had a crisis with Buddhism a year ago at the retreat in '97, actually. And as long as you all are here, I would like to get some perspective. My main political work for the last several years has been working to challenge the global economic systems, in particular the World Bank and International Monetary Fund and the trade agreements that I feel are really at the cause of a lot of the suffering that's going on in the world today. And I've had a frustration, even though I have a lot of respect, and I'm a part of Buddhist Peace Fellowship. I'm a member, and I sit still, and I've been doing it at home, even though I don't come here very often. But I felt a frustration that the Buddhist Peace Fellowship and Engaged Buddhism in general has really been wonderful in dealing with people with AIDS, people in prisons, people who are homeless, but it has not dealt with the reasons people are homeless and with the reasons people are in prison and the institutional mechanisms that are used to keep the rich rich and the poor poor and the police and the wealthy in control of everything and the militaries. And so I would appreciate just anything you have to say about that.
I could say a few things. Do you want to respond also, Terry?
Well, I mean, I think that's an issue for all of us to deal with, and certainly within the prison. The BPF has a new prison project, and we state in the mission statement very clearly that we want to deal with the systemic issues, and that we're all in prison as long as anyone is in prison. And it's hard to do that in a way, but I think we state very explicitly many of the people who are going to be working in the base program that's starting. We're going to look at institutionalized violence and sort of the underlying causes for this. So we have that perspective, how to enact it. We would welcome input. And I think that as we're going to be hiring a new half-time coordinator in the BPF prison project, and we're very much interested in that perspective. It's right there in the job qualifications.
Two things I'd like to add. One is one of the things that goes along with this institutionalized violence is racism. I'm not sure if it's a cause or where it fits, but BPF has been working with a group of Buddhists that come from many different sanghas that just did a day-long healing racism in our sanghas workshop, and there's going to be follow-up on that, and so that's an issue that we're really trying to be proactive about. And another one, looking at some of the causes of the economic injustice. Alan Senaki is part of a Think Sangha, an international group that's been meeting to look at consumerism and some of the other issues that come from corporate greed and that give rise to the inequities both in our country and internationally. And he was just invited to be part of a group of people from many different faiths who were consulting with the World Bank at the request of the World Bank to help them to make their programs more socially relevant. So many of the World Bank programs have increased problems in developing countries rather than helping to solve them. So I think that's a really positive sign, and it was also great that Alan, as director of Buddhist Peace Fellowship, was invited to be part of that. So it's something we're working on. We think it's important to do what we can to relieve suffering directly, but it's equally important, as you say, to look at the causes of that suffering and see what we can do to affect the structures that contribute to it.
Okay, we are running out of time, but there's one hand raising, so maybe we can have one question.
Yes, as a beneficiary of sort of direct help, I just sort of wanted to say, because I've got some friends who are very political. I think that's good, but I agree with you. I think the two-pronged approach is the way, because I remember when my parents' farm failed in Colorado because of the dust bowl, and we were just going up and down the Central Valley picking fruit and vegetables. My parents were, I was too little. I remember that a couple times when we were very hungry, someone giving us food. That meant everything. And of course, there were systemic problems. But there was a point where, there was the 6-year-old was very hungry, and there were people there to give food. And I think we have to remember that part too, even though we should also, I agree 100%, attack those systemic issues as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Why don't you ring your bells to stop your this?
Okay.
It's a very nice idea.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.